Well, class 3 is the test. For all of you that have teenagers, and you send them off to school every day, and you expect them to sit through 3 classes in the morning and pay attention to math and science and English, and then history and social studies in the afternoon, you realize they only get 5 minutes between breaks. That's it, 5 minutes between classes. And you had 15. But that's what you're sending them off to every day. That's how it's just such a busy life, the teenage life. And school teachers are the same way. I can remember, I used to tell Sue, school teachers had the biggest bladders that they've ever looked at in history, because you just never get a break. You don't dare drink coffee during class because you won't get a chance to leave. And that's just the way it goes in teaching. Any of you that are school teachers know that there is no break. You just keep going and going. So, yeah. Anyways, that is our test right now, is to find out, can you pay attention for 3 straight classes without having an even bigger break and having dinner? So I'm going to hand out meal tickets after class to all of those who pay attention. And you get to go on the line first. And all of you that don't, maybe you get no dinner. No, no, we won't do that. So this is actually the fun political class. This is where you get into all the political intrigue that the angels were conspiring with as you get into the study of Ezra. That's what we're into today. It should be, don't give up when things go wrong, which, let's see if it wants to move. Yes, it moved. So I do think it's a good warning when you look back at the problem of Ezra chapter 3, that as they got together and the big shout went out, and all the nations around should have found out that the nation was unified and that God was working in this and getting the work going, that this turned out to be a disappointment among some of the people. They did. Some of the people, especially the older ones, they despised the day of small things. And so what God does for all of us, when he sends his angels out to work on our lives and our ecclesias and our families every day, they custom make trials for the experiences of our life. Now, it's like a custom-made education. It's every college or university's their dream world of what you would want to tell teachers is that you are supposed to take a classroom of 30 to 40 kids, get to know them so well that you can bring the exact right way to them of how to deliver that message today, no matter what their disability is and whatever their handicap is. But you got to get to know each one of them so that you can deliver it exactly the way they need it, which every teacher knows you just cannot do. But when God sends out his angels, what they do, they custom make the trials for us. And so they're going to bring trouble into the life of the community right now, I think, as a result of the way the people responded in Ezra chapter 3. And you'll see that as we move into chapter 4. So what happens in 4 is when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the descendants of the captivity were building the temple of the Lord God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do. We have sacrificed to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria, who brought us here." That's their excuse. You remember that? What Esarhaddon did is that the Assyrian strategy for keeping captives under control throughout their empire as they conquered a nation is that they take a whole bunch of people out of that area and they would scatter them all over their empire, and they would bring people from other areas and fill up that area so that you get a whole compilation, a hodgepodge of people, a mixture of people from all these different nations. This is what happened up in the north with Samaria, the Samaritans. Now, Samaria was known to be an area that had been inhabited by all these unbelievers. You remember what happened when they did that is that they had to bring in people to teach the locals about how the God of Israel's worship, because God had sent lions and stuff among them and was killing the people. So Zerubbabel and Joshua and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses said to them, "You may do nothing with us to build a house for our God, but we alone will build to the Lord God of Israel, as the king of Persia has commanded us," King Cyrus. So he looks back at Zerubbabel and Joshua. They look back at the authority they were given and said, if you read the decree said that the Jews could go back and the Jews could build the temple to their God. Didn't say we had to use workers from around the nations. So they did hang a bit on that technicality, but they made a decision that they didn't want the foreigners involved with the community because they realized that the involvement with the foreigners is what had caused the problem in the first place that led to the captivity, with all the foreigners and their false gods, bringing them into Israel, the Canaanites, when they didn't destroy all the nations, and when Joshua came in and took the land, all of that compiled over time to the point that they had the idols in their hearts. So the leaders took a really firm stand at this point. So the adversaries in this case would be what we would call Samaritans. Now, these may be Samaritans that didn't even know about Yahweh, although they claimed to have worshiped him. But when you're reading back through Chronicles and you find out what happened is that when they brought in these people and they taught them about Yahweh, all they did is take Yahweh worship and sort of add it to whatever other stuff they had. Now they had more gods to serve and more gods to worship. It wasn't that they were only worshiping Yahweh, they were worshiping all kinds of idols. So they wanted to help. Now, you really could have used the help, right? If you were one of the workers, you'd be looking at that. And as an individual person in the community, you'd be thinking, oh, come on, let them work. Let them work. We need the help. Then I won't have to work so hard, right? That's what a lot of folks would be thinking. But the leadership took a stand and said, no, we're going to draw the line right there. They're not going to help build. And the people had to accept that. That was the decision of the leadership of the community. So yeah, they claimed to worship God, but they worshiped all their idols too. You see that in 2 Kings 17, if you look at that section. And the Assyrians, what they did is they moved Jews out of the north and they brought in all these Gentiles. So you get this whole mixture, compilation of all kinds of different worship up there. But no compromise for Zerubbabel and Joshua. They're going to hold firm. So if you look back and look at that, you can see that what happened is that they brought in all these people of the other nations. They brought in the men of Babylon, made Succoth in verse 30 of 2 Kings 17. And it says back in verse 29, every nation continued to make gods of its own. So they made Succoth in verse 30, the men of Karnath made Nergal, the men of Hamath made Ashima, and so on. You get all these false gods. But in verse 32, yeah, and then they also feared the Lord. So they knew about Yahweh, they feared him too, but they had all these other idols. And they never really kept to the law at all, but instead what they did is appointed themselves priests for the high places from all the different classes of people. They didn't really care about what God had said in the law. You know, they feared the Lord, right? In 2 Kings 17 at verse 33, they feared him. They were afraid of him, but they really didn't worship him as their God. They served their own gods according to the rituals of the nations from among whom they were carried. And that's what became the basis for the Samaritans. 2 Kings 17 is where all that's recorded. So here's the first test God throws at them. So the angels then organize this event where now these people show up, they want to help. And the question is, are you going to allow idolatry to return to the community? Are you going to let the other nations bring their idols back in like you did before? Are you going to do that? Or have you learned something from that 70-year captivity? And the great thing is that the people were willing to separate from the nations and stand fast for Yahweh and to guard the truth that was entrusted to them. Yes, they did. For now, they made that decision and they stood firm on that issue. So great, they survived step one. They decided to draw that line and said, we're not going to go back to that way of life. We're not going to allow that to come back in the community. And we are going to keep that line. That's what they did. So when you go back and look at their excuse, it was as Cyrus had commanded. And the people of the land then, what they did is when they realized they couldn't help build and they couldn't get involved, then they decide to discourage the Jews. Sound familiar? It's the same kind of strategy that happened when Balaam was out there and Balak wanted him to curse the people. And all he would do is bless the people. And in the end, they realized the only way to defeat these people is to get their God angry at them, or to, in some way, try some other strategy like this to get the people of the land discouraged. But we're not going to be able to help build. So that's what they did. They had to live with the fact that that decision came with cost, that now these people are working against us. And can you imagine the arranging meetings and all the people of the Jewish community getting together and saying, oh, see, if you had let them work with us, then they wouldn't be out there causing all this trouble. But the leadership knew this is what caused the problem in the first place. We're not going to go back to idolatry. We don't want these people worshiping with us, and we don't want them helping to build the temple. So it does cost. There is a cost involved to drawing lines like that. So when you go back and look at compromising alliances with the world, how destructive they were, look at how Lot, back in Genesis 19, and all that period, when he moved down and he set his tent up over there, and when he moved down into the Jordan, the next thing you know, he's right in the city. He's at the gate of Sodom, and look at what happened to Lot's family as a result of that. You got to remember that why did Lot split off from Abraham? Why did they split in the first place? Because there were so many people, there wasn't room for them. And then you get down to Genesis 19 and you find out there's Lot, his wife, his 2 daughters, 4 people. That doesn't sound like a very big group anymore. That's all that's left of that big group that couldn't live with Abraham. It's really sad to watch. But you learn from those things and realize, wow, it's another study itself. I think we can all learn from Lot that when those kind of things happen to somebody in ecclesial life, we have to have our eyes out and awareness of it. When people have made some bad decisions that lead them down these kind of pathways, you don't just stand on the sidelines and say, well, you made that bed, now you get to live in it. Or, you made the choices, now you can live with them. That doesn't help the person. Lot was like a depressed man at this point. And what he should have done, what you'd think a thinking person would have done would have looked and said, look, what am I doing down here? I couldn't live with Abraham. There are too many people. Now I'm down to me, my 2 daughters. What should he have done? Gone back to Abraham. I mean, the solution would have been simple. Abraham would have welcomed them at that point. And instead, they go up into the hills, they go over to Zoar in the end, and his 2 daughters become pregnant from him. And one bad choice leads to another because depressed people don't make good choices. And they're counting on us, brethren and sisters, to help them, not to judge them and criticize them, but to help them get through the next step. So you look at Judah, the businessman, the big economic guy. Genesis 37 is all about the great things Joseph was doing, and Genesis 38 is put there to contrast. God makes us contrast. Look at what Judah's doing. He's all caught up in this world. He's got his businessman, the sheep shearers, all this stuff he's involved in, living the high life. And that's Judah. And he ends up with his friend, Hira the Adullamite, who just doesn't care at all about spiritual things. No moral at all, no morality to him. So it's not a big deal. Go see a prostitute. Great, I'll take stuff back. I'll make the exchange. No big deal. Or look at Jehoshaphat and his marriage alliance that he makes with Ahab's daughter, with Jezebel in this case. And the political military alliance he makes when they go up to fight against the Syrians, where Joshua almost loses his life. And the angel saves him and has that arrow go through and kill Ahab, because that was the plan all along. Ahab was going to die. Or the economic decisions he made when he gets together. Jehoshaphat was a guy who was so driven for unity, he couldn't quit when God was putting up all these barriers to him. So he's sort of on the other side of this. Jehoshaphat grew up with a dad who fought unity, and he separated, and he did get himself killed in the end. And Jehoshaphat grows up thinking, I'm going to solve the problem. I'm going to create unity between the kingdoms, no matter what the cost. And that's what he did. You look at his life. One thing after another was for unity. He just was so committed to uniting the kingdom, and he was doing it the wrong way. God didn't want it united at this time. And so he pays for it with everything. Even at the end, you wonder, like in 2 Chronicles 20, that incident where he gets together and makes those ships, that was after the war in Syria. He should have learned the lesson. But here he is still saying, oh yeah, I'll get together with the next king of Israel, get Joram, come on down here, we'll have a united agreement, we'll get together and have a financial agreement to build ships and go collect stuff, and we'll do that. And God just wrecked all the ships. That's poor Jehoshaphat. He just couldn't understand that God was not allowing that direction to work. So you look at people in Hebrews 11 who made tough decisions about this. Tough decisions of faith, looking for the long-term results. This is tough for parents, for ecclesias, for arranging boards, but there are times where we need to make the tough, hard decision because it's not just about the moment of time, it's because we see what's going to the future and we want to prevent things. That's what these people did when they said, nope, they're not going to work with us. When Noah built the ark, he spent a long time building that ark, probably not 120 years like a lot of people think, because you look at the ages of his kids who seem to have been born before he was ever told to build the ark. I think they were like 80 something when they landed. So it was probably less than 80 years, but still it was a long time to build the ark and suffer all that abuse during that period. But he knew it was the right thing to do. It was a huge witnessing project. Or Abraham, when he's willing to offer up Isaac, or when he left Ur, the unknown land, and he's going down, he gets to Israel, he's left Ur the Chaldees, he goes all up that journey, comes down to Israel, and there's a famine in the land, and the land's sort of worthless, and he has to go down to Egypt. But people have made good choices that have long-term results. When he let Lot have the first choice of the land, Abraham was looking for the long term. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of examples like that through the scriptures where people made long-range spiritual decisions that came about with uncomfortable results in the short term, but they realized that God would work with this, and it was all about the long run. So here's what happens. Verse 4, the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah. They troubled them in building, and they hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, because remember, Cyrus reigned for another 6 years when they started building, even until the reign of Darius, the king of Persia. Darius being the king when the temple was finally built. So through this whole period, they're going to cause trouble after trouble after trouble because they weren't allowed to build. That is the whole time span, by the way, of the building of the temple. It's from the days of Cyrus all the way until the days of Darius, because we know the temple's finished in the 6th year of Darius. So then verse 6 goes back and recaps, here's the things they did. In the days of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. So that's what they did then. They wrote false accusations against the Jews. Then in the days of Artaxerxes, the next king, also Bishlam and Meredith and Tabeel and the rest of their companions wrote to Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, and the letter was written in the Aramaic script and translated into the Aramaic language. So you might wonder, well, who are these guys? Who is Cyrus? We already know. All the way down to Darius, where the temple's finished. Who's this Ahasuerus and Artaxerxes that are inserted in between? So we're going to find that out as we go through this. So now the second test. Are they going to be able to endure the pressure that was put on them from the outside? That's a different problem from inviting in people. It's easy to build a wall and say, all right, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to let you work on the wall, on our house. We're not going to let you come and do it. But what happens when those people bring pressure on our lives? Are we going to cave in to the pressure? So were they ready to endure tribulations as a result of those decisions? Were they ready to endure trouble for many years and continue steadfast in their devotion to building God's house in a time of distress and disappointment when their faith got challenged? That's the test that they're running into. And sadly, the answer was no, they weren't. This is where they failed. As the project went on and went on longer and longer, and the discouragement came even heavier and heavier, and the spirit rose up within the community of we really shouldn't be doing this. I told you from the beginning it was the wrong thing. It doesn't even look very good. It's not like the first temple. All these discouraging things came and they just spread amongst the people. And after a few years of building, the people ended up deciding, I'd really like to take some time off of building and build my own house. That's what I'd really like to do. I'd like to go home and do my gardens. I'd like to go home and panel my house. You find in Haggai, they were paneling their houses. That's what I'd rather do. I'd rather spend more time with my crops and get a lot more money in the harvest at the end of the year and put that into my pockets. And Haggai says, don't you realize you put them in the pockets with holes? The money fell right through because God raised the inflation rate. Is that happening here in Canada right now? Are you getting higher inflation like we are in the States? Yeah. So your money's not worth what you thought it was anymore, right? See, this is what happens. God does this to us when we get off the track to get us back on track. And that's what he did. That's what Haggai says. So when we get to this point in Ezra, what you're going to find is that if you read Christadelphian books, and even books from outsiders, it isn't just Christadelphians, but some of you read Christadelphian books from the CMPA from England, and some of you read books from Australia and stuff that's come out of there, or listen to classes from Australia. You're going to find that this is a point where our community diverges on how they approach Ezra chapter 4. Some people think that Ezra chapter 4 was all about just the kings involved in building the temple, like it says. Other people think that, oh, well, this can't just be that. It must go all the way to Artaxerxes, who's a different king than I'm going to look at, and he comes along 58 to 60 years later. And so they push the whole timeline 58 years into the future. And then they have to account for the fact that what in the world is Ezra 4 doing, talking about kings that had nothing to do with the building of the temple? Because Ezra 4 is all about the building of the temple. But just so you are aware of it, that is what you will see in our community. It's a difference in culture. It also shows us that, in terms of like spiritual lessons from that, we grow up in ecclesias where you have been taught things from early days, if you grew up in our Sunday schools, and listening to people give classes like me and exhortations, where you have developed a culture of how you interpret the Bible. And when you move around our community, you find out, oh, this group over here has a different culture, and this group over here has a different culture. We all believe the BASF. We've got this statement of faith that holds us together, but we have other things that we are learning about, and it might be something on divorce and how you view divorce, or it might be something on evolution, or it might be something on some other topic that, your community you grew up in trained you to see it this way. And then you end up thinking, well, that's the only way to see it. And this is a great example of that, because we have people, Christadelphian people in two totally different areas that have grown up in different cultures. And when they write books, one group writes it this way and the other group writes it that way. And it's just interesting to note that this is what happens in our community. But we need to be aware of this about ourselves, brothers and sisters, because I grew up with a culture in Detroit, and I moved around to different ecclesias, and each ecclesia had a different culture, a different spiritual culture of how they saw things, how they interpreted things, how they reacted to problems and issues in ecclesial life. But you have to realize that the culture of your own ecclesia might not be right. Might not. Maybe somebody else's ecclesia actually has it right. And don't spend your time fighting them and defending the culture of your ecclesia when it might even be wrong. Are you sure it's right? Do you really have the backing? Do you understand it? Or do you just sort of rattle off what you've been taught? And I'd warn that to everybody, because there's a lot of things that when I started reading the Bible myself, I started realizing things that I had been told I didn't find in the Bible. Didn't find those things in the Bible. But it could have been a simple thing. Like, we were told back in Detroit, give you a simple example. If two young people had premarital sex, we grew up being told by our ranging board, they had to get married, That was the rule. You got to get married. I just grew up thinking that. I probably went around telling other ecclesias, that's what you're supposed to do. Then I read through the Old Testament and found out, oh my goodness, God was wiser than that. He said, if dad vetoes it, it's done. That's right in the law. God put right in the law that if the father vetoes it and realizes this isn't going to work, you don't force people into a situation that the dad knows is not going to work. And God provided that as an out. And it was like, wow, that's a reasonable suggestion. Let's at least think about this rather than pushing young people into something that may be a road to disaster. And that's just one case of things that I looked at and just was overwhelmed with how the Bible had other answers to things than my ecclesia I grew up in. It is probably true of every ecclesia. No ecclesia has all the right answers. None of them do. That's why it's good to talk to people from other areas and find out, what did you find in the Bible? How do you react to this? What's your biblical support for this idea? And we talk to people to try to get it right. So anyways, this is a minor issue. You try to look at which way you go on this. So I'll just point out to you that what happens is the strategy I'm going to take, which happens to be the Australian version, if you're wondering, is that we're looking at Cyrus here. And then the next king in Ezra 4 is Cambyses. The next king in Ezra 4 is this fellow called Gomedes. Sometimes he's referred to as Pseudo-Smyrtus because he was an imposter. And then the last king is this Darius. He's the guy in which the temple was finished. We're only dealing with this period right here. All of the English books go all the way down to Artaxerxes Longimanus and think that that's who the Artaxerxes is they're talking about, which is much further down the line than Darius Hystaspes. So anyways, we'll look at that. The problem that you run into is all those extra years. What are you going to do? Ezra's dad was dead when they went into captivity, and Ezra's still alive, and he would have been a really old man if Artaxerxes was the king in which Ezra was actually when he comes back. So anyways, that's besides the point. But what really convinced me is that as you read through Ezra chapter 4, what is it about? What is Ezra 4 about? Context. What is it about? It's all about the temple. It's about the temple, not about the building of the walls. The only people that bring up building of the walls are the false accusers that are trying to convince the king of Persia to stop it. And they bring up false accusations against the Jews. Don't get sidetracked into that thinking that that was the real issue. Oh no, this whole chapter is all about the building of the walls. It tells you by the end of the chapter, the work was stopped in the last verse. The work of the temple was stopped. And then the next chapter tells you how they got it going again. So I think context itself shows you that really the answer in Ezra 4 is there's 4 kings in Ezra 4, and there they are. There's Cyrus, Cambyses, his son, Gomedes the imposter, and Darius Hystaspes. That's it. That's all you need for the book of Ezra, those 4 kings. So Ezra 4, when you look at it, you can see the entire chapter is about the building of the temple. Verse 23, the letter comes, all right, and they made them stop, it says, by force of arms, they made them cease. And so by the end of the chapter, the very last verse says, the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, ceased. And it's discontinued until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So you go back there and look at that, and you can see what happened was the work stopped, which I think you're going to see is during the reign of this Gomedes fellow who was an imposter. And it stopped for about 1.5 years or so until the 2nd year of Darius, and then it got going. There was no long period in here in which the work on the temple stopped. No way. God got Zechariah and Haggai involved right away and got them going again. And the encouragement that they got, do you remember what it says in Zechariah 3? Zechariah 3 is a message to Joshua. You will be alive when this temple is finished. You're going to watch it go up, and you're going to change your clothes, take off all your dirty clothes, and put on the role of the high priest again. That's Joshua. You're going to be alive. That's 60 years later. Now this is going to happen. And what about Zerubbabel? As Zechariah chapter 4, Zerubbabel, you're going to be alive, and you're going to watch the last capstone go up with shouts of grace to it. That's how this fits together, and it really fits well. But the political background to this is just fun to watch. So it was really all about the stopping of the temple. So when you look at that, the temple work stopped probably in the reign of this imposter, this guy they call Gomedes in history now, or Pseudo-Smyrtus, because he claimed to be the son of Cambyses. But what people think is that he was actually murdered, and Cambyses' son was murdered, and instead this guy took over. And finally they realized that he only reigned for 7 months, and he was taken out of the way, and Darius Hystaspes came in. So again, it was angels working in the governments. Something happened that just stopped everything. And then within a short period of time, less than 2 years, they totally reversed it all and let all the work finish. And they blessed them with privileges that the Jews just couldn't imagine they were going to get. Not only can they finish the work, but all the adversaries were told to leave them alone, and you guys all got to pay for it. I mean, you look at what happened. The angels just pulled off the unbelievable. You'd be sitting there thinking like, my goodness, we couldn't have even asked for this. Look what God did because we got back involved. We didn't give up. We kept going. And God finished the work. He did it. He brought it to completion. So the temple gets finished then in the 6th year of Darius, Hystaspes. And then I think you're going to see in the next chapter of Ezra, that Ezra comes back in the 7th year of Darius Hystaspes. He comes back the next year. When he hears the temple's finished, he comes back right away and starts working on the temple. And to me, that in the end, that chronology fits so much better than trying to play around with those 58 years and accommodate for what happened in there. So all the kings of Ezra 4, they all influenced the building of the temple. So you can see that there is in verse 7, there is during the reign of Artaxerxes, right? There's this Artaxerxes that, again, Artaxerxes is just a title, but in the reign of Artaxerxes, they wrote this, and the copy of the letter shows up from Artaxerxes when it comes back, and that's what made the temple cease. The sad thing is, brothers and sisters, that during that little window period right there, during that little 1.5 year window when the work ceased, really what happened is that God gave the people what they really wanted. Think about it. They've been working on the temple for 15 years. 15 years. They were tired. There were people discouraging them, both from the outside and the inside. This temple's nothing. You're wasting your time. It's a day of small things, you know. How can you get excited about this? They had problems from the inside, problems from the outside with the adversaries. It wore them out over time. And this is what can happen to long-term projects. Things that you've been working on for a number of years in your life, and you just can't seem to resolve it. And you get discouraged and tired. You can't give up. You got to keep involved, or at least encourage the people that are willing to take it over and get involved. And this is the challenge that God put before him. And so what he did in the end is he said, you don't want to work on this anymore? Fine, I'll send the Persian army in. They're going to show up with their weapons, and they're going to make you stop until the day that you want to get going again. And that's what he did. At the same time, he raised up Zechariah and Haggai to encourage them to get working. So here's what the angels actually accomplished in the line of Cyrus. Here's Cyrus, the king that we know as Cyrus, who made the decree for them to go back. This is a reign of the Persian kings coming down through here. And here you got Cyrus up in there, which you cannot see. There it is. It's on the other screen. Yeah, maybe I forgot I can use a pointer. It's not a TV. Good idea. So we're talking about Cyrus the Great right here. So Cyrus has a son, Cambyses. He only reigns for about 8 years. And then what happened is Cyrus had a brother named Bediah. And then he had a son, and they're not really sure in history. But more and more, the history is pointing towards the fact that one of these two right there is the guy that took over. And what happened is that Cambyses was killed. It was a coup attempt. And they killed him, and somebody else took over. And they think the fellow that took over was an imposter. He really wasn't one of those in the Persian line. And so this guy comes in, and he reigns for about 7 months. And the Persians got together, the higher ups and the Persians, they got together. And I think there were 7 of them that in history it says they got together, and they decided that Darius Hystaspes, Darius the Great over there, he would be the next one that they would support. And they overthrew this Gomedes fella, got rid of him, and totally changed the kingdom. Another one of these times where the angels totally overthrows the political events. In a very short period of time, you have everything changed. And so the kingdom went then from this fella over here, from Cyrus. It went from Cyrus's family line right here, and it switched over to this other part of the family line. So the Greek name of this guy is Smerdis. That was his Greek name, this Bediah fellow right there. So sometimes the historians will refer to him as pseudo-Smerdis because he was the fake Smerdis. He really wasn't Bediah, because they think that they not only killed Cambyses, but they killed Bediah as well. So that's the interesting politics going on. And again, showing you how angels can just manipulate the powers that be to their will. Not a problem. And they started working with Darius Hystaspes. So being a math teacher for a lot of years, I love making timelines and figuring out how all these things fit together. So when you're looking at the Persian kings up here, along this line right there, I think this whole story of Ezra actually fits into this period right here. And here is how the events actually fit together, so that the temple they quit their work on the temple back in here. Zechariah and Haggai got them going again right here. The temple's finished only 6 years later in this period here. And finally, then Ezra himself actually returns. So I think it's only 4 years in there. It's actually 4 years from 515 to 516 to 520. So after they get working on it, it only took 4 more years to finish. And then the very next year, Ezra probably came back himself. So that's a suggestion as to how all this fits together. And the fellow that's called Artaxerxes, who made the work stop in Ezra chapter 4, is actually this guy named Gomedes, or he's called Pseudo-Smyrtus. So there's a list, for those of you that like the chart method instead, there is a chart of all the kings in Ezra 4, their names that are given in Ezra 4, and their historical names that they actually have, and how long they reigned. So if you like that kind of history stuff, go at it and have fun. So what the adversaries did is they expanded their complaints. They realized they weren't getting what they wanted. So finally what they did is they sent this letter, and they really exaggerated the whole situation. They got all these people together who wrote a letter, and they made it sound as bad as they could against the Jews. And which is probably this little snapper guy that's in our Bible is probably this Ashurbanipal. And he may have been one of the guys who deported Jews and made them settle people from the Trans-Euphrates from back before. So when they refer back to the days of little snapper. But what you'll see in Ezra 4 is this is typical of what you do in divisions when you create sides. When one side wants to manipulate the other side, force them to do what they want, when people give up their reasons, we got to be really careful that we present truth, because what these guys did is that they said, look at, these guys are building the walls. When you look at that back in verse 12, let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come up to us at Jerusalem and are building the rebellious, evil city and finishing its walls and repairing the foundations. And that what they did is, instead of being honest about it just being the temple of God, like Cyrus had said, they made it sound like they're rebuilding the whole city, putting up the walls. It's a rebellious city, and they put everything they could against them. And that's what happens when there's sides, when we take sides in issues. When your goal is to get your side to win, you present the other side in every evil light you possibly can, and we compromise truth sometimes. We got to be careful. We don't want to do that. So anyways, they put pressure on this imposter king. Now you got to realize this guy's an imposter. He really shouldn't be king. He's sitting up there shaking his boots, realize there were divisions going on the outskirts of the empire. There were rebellions happening all over the place at this point in history. We know that. And Darius Astaspe spent 2 years trying to bring it all back under control. That's why Zechariah talks about that. The angels come in and said, hey, we did our job. We brought the whole thing back under control. All right, God, when are you going to have mercy on this city? That's Zechariah chapter 1, because that's what they did the first year and a half or so of the reign of Darius Astaspe. So that's why all this stuff fits together so well in the end. So anyways, just be careful. We don't want to present things falsely and present them in a worse way than they were. So they write this letter, they put up all their lies and everything they could, make a search, find, all right, these people are just rebellious and so on. This is different than the search that comes later on in Ezra. When the next group of adversaries ask for a search, they say, go ahead and search the records and see if you can find a record of the decree that they could build this thing. It's a whole different group of people the second time around. So the answer is that, all right, you're done. You got to stop. So the lies of the Samaritans in this case, God used that to stop the work. That's what he did. He said, you guys don't want to build, you don't want to work on this, I'll just stop it and you're done. He sends back an answer, and the whole thing is, the answer is, you got to stop. So in verse 23, they went up in haste to Jerusalem against the Jews, and by force of arms, they made them cease. Thus the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, ceased, and it was discontinued until the second year of the reign of Darius. And that's when it picked up again. So be careful in life, because if what we really want in this life, if what we really want, where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. If we really want more time for just ourselves, if we really want the stuff and the toys of this world, if that's what our goal really is, brothers and sisters, God may provide a way for you to have all that. He might. Maybe to learn the lesson of Ecclesiastes that Solomon did, is that, hey guys, I tried it. I got everything I ever could have wanted. And it's vanity. It's all vanity. And if you don't believe Ecclesiastes, you don't believe Solomon, then you may have to go experience it yourself and pray that God will somehow bring you out of it in the end. But the work did stop, but it only stopped for about 2 years or so, and it probably would have frustrated the people. But when you look back at why did he stop it? People were discouraged, they were worn out. Some of the older people didn't like the new temple, and all they did is talk bad about it. The adversaries were hiring counselors against them. The workers wanted to spend more time on their own houses, their farms, their businesses, get more money, and fix up my own place, all those kind of things that people want to do today, right? This world dangles out in front of you all the time, the carrots of all the toys of this world. Look what you could have. You know, take that second job, work all those overtimes, do all that stuff that pulls you away from your family and your ecclesia. Don't get sucked into it, brothers and sisters. It's an endless black hole. And in the end, you'll look back one day and realize it was really vanity. It doesn't bring happiness. It just brings more discontent, wanting the next thing and wanting the next toy and wanting the next one. Let's stay active in our families and ecclesias. And you look at what happened. The people were afraid of the adversaries. So it was the time for the faithful believers to step forward and stir up the community to finish God's house. And so what God did. So the lack of unity can lead to discouraged and uninvolved members. That's something we have to honestly take into consideration today, that when we don't work actively towards unity and creating unity in our families and our ecclesias, what we end up with is all of the damage left behind and the younger generation coming up where they get discouraged, they get disillusioned. They figure this isn't really something I want to get involved in because mom and dad couldn't figure it out. And look at all the stuff they say. And to the younger people that are around, I will tell you that we are counting on you to solve problems that we couldn't solve. We need you. We need you involved. The next generation can many times solve things that the parents' generation couldn't solve. They were stuck in the mud. They had too much history. They were so discouraged about trying this and trying that, and they got so frustrated. And the younger generation can take the torch and run with it and try new things. That's what you want to do. Don't get discouraged. Realize that God will give you the opportunity to finish the work. That's what possibly is out there on the horizons. So what God did is he revived the work. He raised up Zechariah and Haggai, which we'll look at in the next class tomorrow morning. And he used them to get the work going on the house of God. He got it finished and it only took 4 more years and it was done. The prophets of God helping them. The coordinated work of Zechariah and Haggai. In the same way that young people can do this today with their enthusiasm. They can help us take another look at something or solve a problem different. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do that. But I don't want to keep it after. It's time for dinner. And I think everybody gets a dinner pass. Thank you. We'll pick it up there tomorrow.